Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 655. And today's date is April 30th, 2015. And the title of this episode is NORAD is now training for an aircraft attack on DC. Now, before I get started, I just want to let everyone know that on this Friday, I'm going to be putting up a new video with Andy Hoffman. I interviewed him, and this is going to be going on the X22 Report Spotlight channel. This is a new channel which is dedicated to interviewing experts in their field. And if you don't know how to get to it, and you're on the X22report.com site, it is in the sidebar. You will see latest video, and you'll also see a link there that says see all interviews with the X22 Report Spotlight link. If you are on the alert system on the X22report.com site, you will get an email. If you are on YouTube and you subscribe to the X22 Report Spotlight channel, you will get an email. If you don't know where it is and you want to go see it, and you're on YouTube, you can look on the featured section on my X22 Report YouTube channel, and you will see a new channel on the right hand side, or just type in X22 Report Spotlight and it will pop up. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand yesterday the US GDP numbers came in. They were 0.2%, and of course they're blaming this all on the weather, but we have to understand the UK GDP is also slowing. And at this point, what we're seeing is that all this easy money is starting to lose its effect. And the real economic indicators and the illusionary numbers that the central bankers are continually pushing out at us are separating. And we can see that the economy is actually not growing. We see that we bulked up on inventories, about $121 billion worth. Obamacare boosted the GDP. This is not growth. I mean, why does the selling of inventories actually subtract from the GDP? The product has already been produced, and if it's sold, it takes away consumption from products which may have been produced instead. Also, it could only be counted once as a positive, not twice. And of course, all this inventory, as it builds up, it's going to have to eventually be sold off if it can. And once it does, we're going to see a decrease in GDP. Now, we had the numbers come in for initial jobless claims. And of course, they're going absolutely nowhere. For the last 2 weeks, they remain below the magical 300,000 level. Initial claims have only been lower the week of April 14th of 2000. And this just so happened to be the top of the dot-com bubble. Now, what's very odd is that the initial claims are continually falling. They're bottom feeding, then they fall. But what we're seeing is in Texas and many of the other states that deal with oil, they have major layoffs of about 100,000 people. They're just not counted. No one's claiming anything. We also see many stores are closing and laying off people. And you have to remember, those people who are working part-time, and each state it's a little different, who have not worked a certain number of hours or have not received a certain number of dollars, they cannot apply. And this is why we're seeing the initial jobless claims fall. They're being manipulated, and a lot of the people cannot really apply for it. But we see layoffs are continuing. They are non-stop. Target is going to lay off another 100 people in the administrative assistant jobs. This is how it starts. I remember when I worked for a company in New York, and they started the layoff process prior to 2008. They laid off the mailroom. They laid off the secretaries. And when that didn't help, they moved up to the next level, then the next level. And before you knew it, there were thousands upon thousands of people that were laid off. And this was prior to the crash of 2008. We see U.S. Steel. Layoff notices rise to 9,000. I bet you the initial jobless claims don't move anywhere after all of this. Bell Helicopter, 1,100 people. Bob Evans Farms closing 20 locations, all employees laid off. Kellogg closed Clearfield plant, 200 layoffs. GM to cut 1,000 jobs in Canada. The assembly plant looks like it's going to be closing down. We can see there are more and more layoffs coming. And of course the U.S. government, the central bankers, they're out there wondering what's going on. Why aren't people spending? Why aren't people purchasing more homes? Why aren't they going out to retail stores? All of this doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense. You're manipulating the numbers. You're feeding false information. And what's really going on is that people cannot find work. They don't have jobs. And we can see right now that by lowering the fuel prices, I mean, again, there was many different agendas associated with this. They were trying to destroy the economy of Russia. Didn't work. They were trying to spur economic growth here in the United States, hoping that people would take their savings from the gas savings and go out and spend in retail. Well, that didn't happen. During the busiest season of the year, the holiday season, it was a complete flop. And what we're seeing right now is that the latest confirmation that all of this is not working is that personal income and spending data, in which we find that not only did personal income not grow in March, with wage growth the lowest in 2015, but because spending rose by a weaker than expected 0.4% in March, the fourth miss in the past 5 months, U.S. personal savings has resumed declining, and all those gas savings are finally being spent, not where they should be spent, and not in the amounts hoped. A lot of it's going towards Obamacare, paying for health insurance, where they're never going to see the benefit of insurance. Now, am I saying this for every single person? No, there's going to be those people that have a catastrophic illness that go into the hospital, and it will help them. But of course, they're going to have to lay out the money first, because there are deductibles, there are co-pays. But those people, the everyday people who are spending $500, $600, $700 a month, with a deductible of $5,000, it's not going to help them whatsoever. They're just going to be laying out all that money year after year. So what are we seeing right now? With Obama, with the economy, we're seeing no growth, no jobs, no recovery. It's completely fake, phony, and false. I mean, think about it. There's massive layoffs in the oil sector in Texas and many of the other states. Consumers are not spending because of no or poor jobs, which pay half as much as their other jobs they've lost. And when people are unemployed, they don't spend. Activity drops and economy tanks. It's that simple. It's easy to understand. Manufacturing, retail sales, all of it's falling apart. It's in the toilet. It's completely collapsing at this time. Every time we look at this, we see things are getting worse and worse as time goes on. Let's look at some of the signs. The trade deficit with the rest of the planet is absolutely killing our economic growth. According to the Reality Check blog, U.S. economic growth would have been a total of 8% higher since the end of the last recession if we actually had a balanced trade with other nations. According to the numbers that were just released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 1 out of every 5 American families, nobody has a job. So how in the world can the unemployment rate be around 5.5%? When everyone is unemployed in 20% of all families in the United States. The rate of home ownership in the United States has just hit a brand new 25-year low. How can this be a healthy economy? How can the middle class be healthy? Something is disconnected from what's really going on, and we know what that is. The government is disconnected. We are on the right track. We understand that this is collapsing. The student loan bubble is clearly bursting. According to Bloomberg, only 30% of all student borrowers are actually up to date on their payments. And we understand the government has new programs to help the students defer their loans and maybe stop payments right now because they cannot find work. Procter & Gamble and many other corporations have announced more layoffs. I mean, Procter & Gamble is laying up to 6,000 more people. McDonald's is closing 700 stores. We see many retail stores closing down. Tiger Direct, Staples is closing more stores. Many are going out of business. They're saying they're going into the online business, but we don't see that increasing whatsoever, even during the bad weather or the holiday season. There was no bump up. Retail sales in the U.S. have not dropped this rapidly since the last recession. Wholesale sales in the U.S. have not dropped this rapidly since the last recessions. Factory orders in the U.S. have not dropped this rapidly since the last recession. Credit requests are being declined at a rate that we haven't seen since the last recession. So what's happening here? It's completely falling apart. I mean, we know manufacturing is not producing because the Baltimore Dry Index has fallen again by 4 points. It's down to 591. And if we look back in time, back to last year, the year before that, it was 900 points, it was 1,100 points, it was 1,500 points. And now it's staying around the 590s. It gets bumped up a little bit because they increase rates, they increase insurance, but then it's brought right back down. There is no manufacturing at this point in time. Now, there is a report out there, and they're very worried about what's going on in the economy. They're saying if there is a small hiccup, Fannie and Freddie may need to draw up to about $160 billion from the U.S. Treasury. And what they're saying is, we know that the real estate market is a bubble, and when it pops, Fannie and Freddie, they're going to be in trouble once again. That's basically what they're telling us. They did a stress test and they said if there's any type of hiccup or something happens, just a little bit, Fannie and Freddie is going to completely fall apart, like we saw back in 2008. Leading up to 2008, the housing market started to fall apart. And we're seeing this right now. We understand that China created the AIIB, and there's about 57 nations that have joined up. A lot of the nations are allies of the United States. The United States didn't join up. Japan did not join up. But we see Russia could become the third largest participant in the China-led Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank and enter its board of directors. This means that Russia will be able to influence the bank's policy together with its partner in the customs union, offering interesting projects for the bank to fund. And this is going to rival the World Bank. We can see that China, Russia, they understand what is coming. They realize the dollar is at its end here. They realize the U.S. system, the private Western Central Bank system, is dying. And they know that these central bankers are not just going to say, okay, guess what? We're done here. We need to think of a new system. No, they're going to go down fighting because they don't want to be blamed for the collapse of the system. Because if they're blamed, how are they going to restart it? And this is their plan. They plan to cover this up with a war. And then when the war is over, the population is reduced, they would like to restart the entire system once again and steal the natural resources, the wealth of every single country. This is what they've been doing for thousands of years. Now, I talk about Obamacare quite a bit, and I really do believe Obamacare is completely unconstitutional. And it was imposed on the people of the United States because they needed to raise tax revenue, and Obama basically had to pay off the insurance companies, and the insurance companies wrote the bill, and basically it benefits them only, and also to bring in revenue. And when they were doing this, they said, okay, listen, we can raise the rates, and we can continually raise it because there is no competition whatsoever. And how are we going to get everyone into the system? Well, if we put a penalty, a tax penalty, on health insurance, we can force the people into the system. And this is what they did. Because let me just say, if this was for the people, you don't have to penalize us. You don't have to whip us down by imposing taxes on us. We would take it. Just like the iPhone. We saw something new. It was great. It was easy to use, and people went out and they purchased it. Yes, there are some people that don't like it, but guess what? It was a good product. A good product, it sold. If they gave us something good, you don't have to force people to do something. But what's very interesting about this, and we talked about this before, but we're starting to see that there's evidence to back this up. We understand the NSA is spying on all Americans, on government officials, on the Supreme Court justices, and we're starting to see now that Chief Justice John Roberts, who was the deciding vote for the Supreme Court ruling of Obamacare, was spied on and had his personal and private data harvested by the U.S. intelligence agencies. Now, Larry Klayman, the attorney who has become known as the NSA Slayer, has been fighting this. And he is the founder of Freedom Watch, and he successfully is suing the National Security Agency over the collection of telephone metadata from Verizon customers that was detailed in documents released by the intelligence document leaker Edward Snowden. And what's very interesting about this is when Judge Roberts decided to give his deciding vote, the NSA had something on him, because all the way prior to his final decision, he said it was completely unconstitutional. And then one day, he said, you know what? It's constitutional, and he left town for 2 weeks after he made his decision. And now Larry Klayman is digging up all this information. There are some judges that are controlled by the government because they've been spied upon and they have something on them. They are trying to block him from investigating this further. So we do have confirmation at this point in time that it looks like these judges are being blackmailed for a certain agenda. And we see this happening time and time again. And it always comes out later, and we always find the proof, or someone digs it up, and it's too late. Well, I don't think it's ever too late. If it's unconstitutional, we need to roll it back. And the insurance companies need to give all that money back because it was completely unconstitutional. Now, out in Baltimore, we see there's riots that are, not riots, I should say protests. There's a difference between protests and riots. In Baltimore, there were people in Baltimore protesting very peacefully. 10,000 strong. They were protesting. They were very peaceful, but the media didn't report on this. And then all of a sudden, we had a handful of people that started rioting. And the media focused just on that. Well, the reason for that is because, as we know, this whole thing was created. It was manufactured. And a couple statistics about Baltimore. 42% of the residents in the Freddie Graves neighborhood are employed. 33% of residential properties are vacant or abandoned. Just 54% of its residents are even in the labor source, even though 77% of residents are between 24 and 64 years old. During the purge and during what was going on, we saw a handful of people that were pushing a certain agenda. We also see there are protests now going on in Los Angeles. During these protests, 6 people protesting against police brutality were arrested on Monday. In Chicago, hundreds of protesters marched Tuesday from police headquarters. About 100 people marched Monday night in Oakland, and it looks like there's planned protests in Cincinnati. Now, the thing that we need to watch out for is those agent provocateurs, where the people are protesting very peacefully, They're not doing anything. And then all of a sudden, a handful of people decide to destroy property. And it seems like the mainstream media right now is out there, and they're facing criticism of their coverage of the unrest in Baltimore. I mean, Geraldo Rivera, who arrived in Baltimore shortly before the curfew on Tuesday, they blocked his camera and accused Fox News of lying and false coverage. We can see the protesters were out there saying, listen, when we were protesting peacefully, there were thousands of us, there was no media. As soon as something happened, the media and the cameras went away from the peaceful protests right to the small group of people that were rioting. And we can see right now, this does look like it was a staged riot, and it was to provoke an agenda of the government. I mean, there's a video right now on CNN, and I have it on the X22Report.com site and on the YouTube channel, where we see this man who is in front of police, and his name is Joseph Kent. And basically, he is a 21-year-old Morgan State University student, and there were about 30 to 40 police officers and just this man. And when the camera panned out, there was nothing going on outside of this little tiny area, and then all of a sudden, an armored vehicle drove by, he disappeared, and it drove off. And basically, they were trying to make this a really big deal. This, to me, looks like it was completely staged. I mean, the police were just surrounding him. They all had their shields. They were standing there. And when the camera panned out, nothing else was going on around town. They went as far to blame this on the Islamic State. They also said the Islamic State is looking to recruit some of these people who are dissatisfied. We also see a CNN reporter is now blaming the veterans for the Baltimore riots. Brooke Baldwin made the outrageous insinuation that veterans somehow were responsible, at least in part, for the riots. They're doing whatever they can to bring in the Islamic State, blame the veterans, and do whatever they possibly can to completely gin this situation up. But what we've just learned was that this was completely staged. We see a police officer who came down. Michael Lewis is the sheriff of Wicomico County in Maryland. He came down there and he said, I was sick to my stomach like everybody else. This was an urban warfare. No question about it. They were coming in absolutely beaten down. The city officers got out of their vehicles, thanked us profusely for being there, apologized to us for having to be there. They said we could have handled this. We were very capable of handling this, but we were told to stand down and let the people riot and destroy. They don't understand why this was given to them, but they were told specifically to do this. This is what they said. You will not take any action. Let them destroy the property. This was manufactured. Now, if we put all of this together, that's what's going on in Baltimore. We see the police shut down the subway system. They weren't allowing the students to get on the buses to go home. They were keeping them in a certain area, and they were told to step away, let the people destroy whatever they need to destroy. And we saw agent provocateurs, police units being left in certain areas so they would be destroyed. And this was completely created. It was manufactured. It was to create the illusion that people are going crazy and they have to declare martial law. Now, we see other protests occurring in other cities. Have they given up on this yet? Absolutely not. We understand troops now are on the streets, National Guard. There's a curfew in place. And it looks like the majority of the people are obeying the curfew, and there are some that are not. And we see, and we have to understand, are they conditioning us to accept martial law? Because every time this happens, the first thing they do is they manufacture something, they gin it up as much as they possibly can, they bring in troops, And then there's troops on the streets. And it seems like they're continually doing this to brainwash us. So when the time comes, we won't even question it. And if you noticed that we are starting to be bombarded with images of troops in the streets. In recent years, it seems like the solution to almost every major crisis which involves bringing in troops. National Guard troops all over the nation have been trained for this exact type of scenario. It's called civil unrest training, and it was recently completed in Tennessee with a local police department. Troops have also trained in Maryland and Colorado. The training includes gas masks, training, and practice with shields and batons. So all of this is being done. The police are being trained in certain tactics because they are expecting this. They want this. And what we need to do is stay peaceful. Don't give it to them. If we're going to protest, we protest peacefully. It's much more powerful to protest peacefully than it is to riot. Your message gets across. People listen. People join in. The crowds grow. Rioting is the government's way of controlling the people. Peaceful protests grows. It gets larger. It has a voice. And that's what we need to do. So anyone that's thinking about protesting, and protesting is a good thing, because it puts together many people with a strong voice, and the government or whatever body has to listen, because as more and more people join, they can't turn away anymore. Now, we understand the United States government, central bankers, they're losing the war on propaganda. So they introduced a $30 million bill to beef up the propaganda because they need to counter all that Russian propaganda and all the news and the alternative media, the new media, because they're losing the story of what's going on in the U.S. It's being countered by other independent news groups, and they don't like this. They're losing control. They would love to take control of the internet, but they haven't done it yet. They're trying, and we're going to see something occur very soon. They do have kill switches on phones, on the cell towers, to block people from taking, pictures or recording things. And we can see right now they're doing whatever they possibly can to control what is going on. Now, out in Romania, Romanian authorities are saying they need to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the existence of CIA black sites in Romania. And we understand that there are black sites in Poland, Lithuania, and many other countries. And these were set up as secret detention facilities because they were battling the war on terror. And most of these people haven't done anything. They haven't been tried. They're just being held. Now, of course, they can do this because it's out of the United States, but we also understand there is a black site here in Chicago where people are taken in and there's no due process. We see out in Afghanistan, the military troops are never going to leave. Why? Well, we understand the poppy fields are there. They're guarding them. They use the poppy fields to sell opium to other countries to pay for their covert missions. Afghanistan is in a strategic location near Russia. We understand there's a huge lithium mine, huge copper deposits. China's there, Russia's there. And while the president is telling us that, yes, we're going to be withdrawing the troops, we see troops being added. Actually, instead of ending the war there, the military continues to conduct airstrikes, mainly drone strikes, and special operation raids that have gone beyond the range of military operations publicly described by the White House. Actually, they've conducted about 128 airstrikes this year, 52 in March alone, and it's growing. The Afghanistan president is out there saying that the Islamic State is in Afghanistan. The troops are going to stay they're going to be ramped up. The United States government central bankers will never let Afghanistan go. We see out in Ukraine, we understand the economy is completely falling apart. And Ukraine has the fastest falling economy of 2015, according to the British periodical The Economist. The country has seen its GDP shrink by 6.5% since last April. The Ukrainian economy showed the most significant deepening recession compared to the rest of the world. Thank you, United States central bankers. Thank you for destroying the economy of Ukraine. You have to remember when they went in there with the coup d'etat, they threw out the elected president, and since then, the economy has fallen apart. And you know what they have now? Debt. That's it. All they have is debt. They did the same to Greece, they did the same to Cyprus, to France, to Spain, to the United States. All of the countries are in major, major debt. Now, The Economist also published rankings of the fastest growing economies in the world. We see New Guinea on top. 5 African countries are among the world's fastest growing economies. BRICS countries, represented by India at number 6 and China ranked at the 12th fastest growing economies. The private Western central bank countries falling apart, declining. Now, Kiev is continually shelling the Donetsk area. They have not stopped. The DPR has registered 37 violations in the 24-hour period, including 4 times from heavy artillery and 15 times from mortars. They're saying it is non-stop. They haven't stopped shelling whatsoever. Now we see there's 400 U.S. military sites have been deployed in countries surrounding Russia right now. And right now, just like they've done in every single other country, the Pentagon will create a base in Ukraine. Actually, they're getting ready for this. 6 bases opened when Iraq was occupied. After the Internal Security Assistance Force had visited Afghanistan, dozens of bases were deployed. And what are they going to do in Ukraine? Well, the troops are already there, and they're going to create a base inside of Ukraine. We understand the Donbass region is receiving intelligence. They're saying that it looks like there's a major offensive that's going to happen maybe May 8th or May 9th or maybe days before, days after. Don't know for sure. Ukraine is saying, no, we have... There's no large military operation plan whatsoever. No, I'm sorry, there's nothing. But the Lugansk people, the Donetsk people, they're not taking any chances whatsoever. They're asking the authorities from the OSCE, the Special Monitoring Mission, to step up monitoring in all areas during the time period from today, April 30th, all the way to May 11th, to be sure, because they want them to catch anything that happens. Now we can see that Kiev and the U.S., they are definitely planning for something to happen. Because the top U.S. commander for NATO said Thursday that America needs better intelligence on the ground in Ukraine. But it appears that Russian forces have used a recent lull in fighting to reposition for another offensive. Now remember, it's always the opposite when these government officials come out and say something. What they're talking about is they're getting ready for a major offensive. They're going to blame it on Russia. We see already John Kerry. We see other officials out there saying that Russia has troops on the border. They're building up. When actually what's happening is Kiev and the U.S. is doing this. And they need more intelligence to see where the forces are for Donetsk and Lugansk. And this is what they're calling for. And we can see right now that they are definitely getting ready for something huge to happen. Now, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Philip Breedlove said on Thursday, "I support the consideration of using offensive weapons to change the decision calculus on the ground in eastern Ukraine and to facilitate bringing our opponent to the table for a solution, a final solution." So he's looking to get lethal weapons into Ukraine. And we know they're already being brought in the cover of darkness so no one really sees it. Even though they're telling us no, These are non-lethal. Lethal weapons are being brought in. Now, President Poroshenko was out there, and we can see just from what he is saying on his local TV that he is definitely preparing for a major offensive. He said the war will end when Ukraine will regain Donbass and Crimea. Like I said, the central bankers have given him instructions. We paid $5 billion for the entire country of Ukraine. We did not get the southeast, and we did not get Crimea. And we will not stop until we do. The Ukrainian president added that the combat operations in the conflict zone would be carried out for as long as it is necessary. There were unidentified special forces fight against battalions of Ukrainian nationalists. Unidentified special task force are conducting a special operation in the area of the township of Donbass. About 5 a.m., reconnaissance registered a brief exchange of fire at the position of Ukrainian army units. And our reconnaissance officer said in the reports that there were unknown units of commandos that stormed and seized a platoon-level fortified strongpoint set up by punitive expeditioners from a nationalist battalion. So there are forces in there that nobody knows who they are at this point in time. Now, the United States now sees the Ukrainian rebels as a Russian force. The U.S. quietly introduced a new term, combined Russian separatist forces, by describing them as an integrated force in the east of the country. The U.S. is putting greater responsibility on Russia for the continued fighting. That will make it harder for Russia to persuade the U.S. and Europe to scale back sanctions that are hurting its economy. So what they're doing right now is they're convincing everyone that these forces are basically Russian forces. Why? Because eventually what's going to happen is they're going to try to provoke Russia into doing something. They want a war. This is what they've been pushing. And this is why they're combining it and saying they are now Russian forces, period. And we have to remember, the supreme commander of the NATO forces, he says, we need the offensive weapons to make Russia stop doing what they're doing, and we need a peace agreement. There is already a peace agreement. It's called the Minsk II Agreement. Russia was there. France was there. President Poroshenko was there from Ukraine. And the president of Germany was there. And they all discussed it. The United States didn't show up. So there is a peace deal, but this is not what they're talking about. They want Ukraine, and then we'll have a peace deal. They don't look at the Minsk II as actually a peace deal. They're ignoring it. And it's self-evident from all the shelling that's going on. Now, out in Yemen, it looks like the South Yemen insurgents have taken control of the Aden airport. The Houthis are fighting them for control of the airport. And it looks like Saudi Arabia is openly arming Sunni militants in Yemen. It looks like it's a repeat of Syria. They're taking the tribes, the Sunni tribes inside of Yemen. They're arming them, they're training them, and telling them to go fight. We're seeing a complete repeat of Syria at this point in time, because they need a ground force to go in. And they're hoping if they can train these people, bring them into the country, they will do the job. And we know that Saudi Arabia, the ground troops are just sitting there and waiting to go into Yemen. We see that U.S. is sending troops to train the Syrian rebels, and they're sending them to Turkey. Some 40 U.S. military personnel arrived in Turkey to assist in training the Syrian opposition to fight against the Islamic State. The U.S. soldiers, all members of the special forces, are to join their Turkish colleagues at a military base. The training will start in 10 days. They're going to be training the group in about 400 at a time, and then they're going to release them. And of course, as we know, they're not going to be going after the Islamic State. They're going to be going after the Syrian armed forces. They've already released 1,200 that they trained, and they did not fight against the Islamic State. They went right towards Damascus, right towards the Syrian forces. We see the U.S. now is poised to expand the Islamic State fight worldwide. And remember, the authorization for war is pending in Congress. And we see they're showing us, and a lot of it's propaganda coming out of SITE, intelligence, Rita Katz, trying to convince us that the Islamic State is everywhere. She takes her film crew, her 20 or so people, dresses them up in costume, puts them out in a desert, films it. People believe it. They add a lot of nice filmage to it to make it look really nice. And then all of a sudden, the Islamic State is in that country. They're telling us they're in Yemen, they're in Lebanon, they're in Libya, they're in Iraq, they're in Syria, they're in Afghanistan. They're going to be going to Italy soon. Remember, wherever the United States government central bankers need to be or need to go into, that's where the Islamic State is going to show up. They're also linked to Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab or Al-Qaeda. And if you notice, the Islamic State is in only those regions where they need to get back into. They're nowhere else. I mean, it's amazing. But this is the plan. They are a proxy army. Now, we understand that Jade Helm is going to happen this summer. The White House is trying to reassure the public and the governor of Texas that a special U.S. military training operation called Jade Helm will not pose a threat to residents at all. They said, and I quote from the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest, "In no way will the constitutional rights or civil liberties of any American citizen be infringed upon while this exercise is being conducted." So basically what he's saying is, while this training is an exercise, nobody's rights will be infringed upon. But when it's not an exercise, he didn't mention anything. So you see what's happening right here. It's a play on words. And of course, the governor of Texas is out there saying, well, you know something? I'm a little worried about this. And he's going to put the National Guard on alert. He says, I am directing the Texas State Guard to monitor Operation Jade Helm 15. A citizen in Texas, his name is Bob Wells, said the following: "You get the people used to the troops on the street, the appearance of uniformed troops, and the militarization of the police. They're gathering intelligence. That's what they're doing. And they're moving logistics in place for martial law. That's my feeling." He goes, I could be wrong. I hope I am. And we can see that they're doing this in many different states. So I think there's one state that declined the training, that said, no, we do not want this to happen here. But I do believe that this is a training mission. Right now it's just an exercise. But they could get the green light and say, okay, it's a go. The whole thing's going live. We've seen this happen before during 9/11, Boston bombing, and many other false flag events. Now, NORAD, they are getting, and they are scheduled to conduct training flights over the nation's capital next week as part of an effort to be able to better defend Washington, D.C. from attacks from other aircrafts. NORAD is coordinating with Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Homeland Security to conduct the training flights, which will take place between May 4th and May 5th over the southeastern corner of the Capitol. The flights are intended to assist in calibration of systems, equipment, and training, and will serve to refine and improve our ability to respond to unknown potential attacks. Now, we've seen this before. The Air Force was having a training mission during 9/11. There was a bomb drill during the Boston bombing. Does this mean it's going to happen? No. But we need to keep an eye on it and call them out on it and say, listen, we know there was a training mission going on the same time this occurred. And we know the economy is completely falling apart. We know that time is running out. They cannot hold the system together for much longer. They've been doing it for a very long time. They thought They were going to capture all the Middle Eastern countries. They thought it was all going to be done. They were going to be in Syria, in Iran. They would have all the oil on the US dollar, central banks set up, but it did not go as planned. And here we are today, 2015. They thought it was going to be all over by 2008. And now each one of these countries are fighting back and pushing the puppet regimes out. Ukraine didn't go the way it was planned. They tried to get into Venezuela. All of it is falling apart. And now we're coming towards the end. The economic indicators, the real economic data that we see is completely separate and apart from their illusionary, manipulated numbers. And they know this. They know the whole thing's falling apart. And there's just so much more trickery they can do. Do they have another trick up their sleeve? Maybe, to hold it off for a couple more months. But eventually, it's all going to run out. And the system is going to come collapsing down. Do we know exactly when it's going to be? No, but we see all of these indicators. We're putting it together. And the biggest thing you can possibly do at this time is be prepared. And what I mean by be prepared is have toiletries, have food, have medical supplies, have a weapon to protect your family, have cash on hand, have gold and silver. Of course, don't tell people where it is, but this is all what you need to do. You need to protect your family, yourself, your home, and you need to be prepared. This is what it's all about. So we can say and march on the government and say, we're done with you. We're done with the central bank. There will come a time and a place when the moment is right, where the people will have the ability to rise up and stop this entire thing from happening. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.